Hey there, folks. Tonight we're diving deep into a world so vibrant, so intricate, it almost feels like a dream. Imagine for a moment the most dazzling parade you've ever seen, maybe a carnival or a Mardi Gras, but instead of sequins and plastic beads, every shimmer and flash comes from thousands upon thousands of tiny iridescent feathers, meticulously arranged into breathtaking art. We're talking about the Aztec Empire, and specifically their legendary featherworkers, the Amanteca. These weren't just craftsmen, they were artists who painted with plumage, creating works that were treasured more than gold. Their skill was so revered, their creations so ethereal, they were quite literally fit for the gods and the highest echelons of society. Now, while we admire their art from the safety of our cozy beds, it's worth remembering that daily life back then, well, let's just say if you weren't a fan of ritual sacrifice or a legal system where a minor theft could cost you dearly, you probably wouldn't have survived this. It was a different world, with a beauty as fierce as its beliefs. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment down below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's dim the lights, turn on your fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a bustling causeway, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, copal incense, and the distant aroma of roasting chilies. This is Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec world, a city built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, a marvel of engineering and a hive of activity. It's sometime in the early 15th century, long before European ships would scar the horizon. The sun is beginning its descent, painting the volcanic peaks surrounding the Valley of Mexico in hues of orange and purple. Around you, canoes laden with goods glide silently through the canals that serve as the city's arteries. The sounds are a symphony of human endeavor. The rhythmic slap of paddles, the calls of vendors, the distant thrum of drums from a temple precinct. You're not here as a warrior or a priest, nor as a merchant haggling over cacao beans, the currency of the realm. Instead, you're seeking out a quieter, more specialized part of the city, the district of Amantla, the legendary home of the Featherworkers. These artisans, said the Amanteca, hold a unique and honored position in Aztec society. Their craft is ancient, sacred, and incredibly demanding. The mainstream historical fact is that featherwork was so highly valued that it was often demanded as tribute from conquered peoples, alongside gold, precious stones, and textiles. The Amanteca transformed these raw feathers into incredible mosaics, ceremonial shields, elaborate headdresses, and opulent tapestries that adorned temples, palaces, and the very bodies of the nobility and the gods' earthly representatives. As you navigate the narrower walkways, the scent of flowers becomes more pronounced. Not just any flowers, but specific blooms cultivated for their connection to the divine, and perhaps to mask the less fragrant aspects of a densely populated city. You pass by homes made of adobe and stone, some whitewashed, others painted with vibrant murals. There's a curious detail here. Some doorways are lower than you'd expect. Historians still debate whether this was purely architectural style, a way to conserve heat, or perhaps even a subtle mark of humility or respect required before entering certain dwellings or workshops. It's a small thing, but it makes you stoop slightly, a gentle reminder of a different way of living. You might notice little clay stamps being sold by a street vendor, probably used for decorating pottery or even skin, a sort of temporary tattoo parlor, Aztec style. It's a far cry from the grand feather art, but art nonetheless. The air grows quieter as you approach Amantla. The boisterous sounds of the main market fade, replaced by a more focused hum of activity. You can almost feel the concentration in the air, the collective focus of hundreds of skilled hands. You might hear the soft rustle of feathers, the low murmur of voices in Nahuatl, the Aztec language, discussing designs, colors, and the precise placement of each precious plume. It's said that the Amantecas were so dedicated, they often worked from dawn until dusk, their eyesight strained by the intricate work, their fingers calloused but incredibly nimble. They weren't just making pretty objects, they were channeling the power and symbolism of the birds themselves, the divine essence of creatures that could soar between the earthly realm and the heavens. Imagine trying to explain your job as a feather CPA, meticulously accounting for every tiny piece of down and fluff. It's probably not far off the level of detail required. You pause before a doorway that seems a little more adorned than the others, perhaps with a small, subtly woven feather design hanging above it. This could be the workshop of a master Amanteca. You can't just barge in, of course. Protocol, even in your sleepy, imagined state, is important. The Aztec society was highly stratified, and respect for artisans, especially those dealing with sacred materials, was paramount. So you wait, you observe, letting the gentle rhythm of this ancient craft begin to seep into your consciousness, preparing you to witness the magic within. The light is fading fast now, and torches are beginning to flicker to life, casting long, dancing shadows, making the anticipation of what lies beyond that door even more palpable. You take a soft, steadying breath, the cool evening air carrying a hint of ozone from the distant mountains. The subtle sounds from within the workshop beckon you closer. It's not a clamor, but a focused, delicate industry. Someone, perhaps an apprentice, notices your quiet presence at the periphery. There's a moment of assessment in their eyes, not unfriendly, but discerning. You, in your imagined journey, are a respectful observer, not a demanding customer or a prying outsider. Satisfied, they give a slight nod, a silent invitation to glimpse their world. As you step across the threshold, your eyes take a moment to adjust to the dimmer interior, lit by flickering oil lamps and the last vestiges of twilight filtering through a central courtyard open to the sky. The main historical fact here is that Amanteca workshops, or Kalpuli, were often family-based, with skills passed down through generations. This wasn't just a job, it was a lineage, a sacred trust. The knowledge of which birds provided the best feathers, how to ethically source them, sometimes from molted feathers, other times from birds specifically raised or hunted for this purpose, the techniques for dyeing, cutting, and affixing them. All this was guarded family knowledge. You might see older artisans patiently guiding younger hands, the torch of tradition being passed in real time. The workshop itself is a space of organized chaos. Bundles of feathers, sorted by color, size, and species, hang from rafters or are stored in shallow clay dishes. You see the iridescent green plumes of the quetzal, so prized they were often reserved for royalty and depictions of gods like Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. There are the brilliant blues of the cotinga, the sunny yellows of the oriole, the stark whites of egrets, and the fiery reds of macaw feathers. It's like stepping into a rainbow, if rainbows were made of the softest, most delicate material imaginable. Tools are laid out neatly on woven mats, sharp obsidian blades for cutting, bone awls for piercing, and small pots of natural adhesives, likely derived from orchid bulbs or other plant saps. Think of it as the original organic, gluten-free artisanal glue, probably smelled better than our modern concoctions too. One rather odd detail you might notice is the presence of small, caged birds in a quieter corner of the workshop. While many feathers were sourced from tribute or trade, some Amanteca kept live birds, not just for their plumage, but perhaps also as living color references, or even as a source of inspiration, observing their movements and the way light played on their feathers. Imagine having your color palette not in a software program, but chirping and fluttering right beside you. It certainly beats Pantone swatches. Historians still debate the full extent to which live bird aviaries were integrated directly into the Amanteca households versus being managed in more centralized locations, but their presence nearby was crucial. You watch an artisan at work. He or she, as women were also integral to featherworking, particularly in spinning thread and creating the base netting or fabric, is bent over a piece of stretched cotton. With almost surgical precision, they are applying tiny feathers, one by one, to create a complex geometric pattern. The feathers are often layered like shingles on a roof to create depth and a shimmering, almost holographic effect as the light catches them from different angles. This technique, known as feather mosaic, was incredibly labor-intensive. A single shield or mantle could take months, even years, to complete and involve tens of thousands of individual feathers. You try to imagine the patience required, the unwavering focus. It makes doing your taxes seem like a walk in the park, a very, very dull park. The conversation, if you could call it that, is minimal. A soft word here, a gesture there. The work itself speaks volumes. There's a sense of reverence for the materials. Each feather is treated with respect, as if it still carries a spark of the bird's spirit. This wasn't just decoration. It was imbuing an object with spiritual power, with Teotl, the divine force that permeated the Aztec cosmos. A warrior wearing a feather-adorned costume wasn't just dressing up. He was transforming, taking on the attributes of the eagle or the jaguar depicted in the plumage. It's a bit more intense than putting on a team jersey for the big game, wouldn't you say? You notice different stages of work around the room. On one side, an apprentice is carefully cleaning and sorting newly arrived feathers, his brow furrowed in concentration. On another, a more experienced artisan is sketching a design onto a piece of maguey paper, the outlines faint and delicate. And in the center, under the best light, the master worker you glimpsed earlier continues their painstaking creation, their movements economical and precise. The atmosphere is not unlike that of a scriptorium or a modern-day animation studio, where intense, this detailed work is carried out in a hushed environment. The silence isn't empty, it's full of creation. The only sound disrupting your quiet observation might be the sudden grumpy squawk from one of those caged reference birds, perhaps annoyed it hasn't received its evening seed. Even divine color palettes get peckish. The shadows deepen, and the lamplight throws golden highlights on the glossy feathers, making them seem to breathe. You realize you're witnessing a form of artistry that is almost entirely lost to us now, preserved only in a few precious surviving examples in the codices that depict them. The skill, the dedication, the spiritual significance, it all coalesces in this quiet, unassuming workshop in the heart of a city built on water, a city that itself would eventually vanish beneath another. But for now, in this moment, the legacy of the Amanteca is alive, vibrant, and utterly mesmerizing. You feel a sense of privilege, a quiet awe at being allowed this glimpse into their ethereal world. The master artisan, whose hands move with a grace that belies the countless hours of practice, doesn't even look up. It's as if their entire being is focused through their fingertips, coaxing beauty from these fragile fragments of nature. You drift, a silent observer, towards another corner of the workshop where finished or nearly finished pieces are carefully stored, perhaps awaiting collection or delivery to a noble patron or a temple priest. And here your breath catches. The sheer variety and splendor are astounding. You see shields, or chimali, not the rough, functional kind for deflecting obsidian-edged swords, but ceremonial ones, ablaze with color and intricate designs. A mainstream historical fact is that these shields were often given as gifts to renowned warriors, or displayed during important rituals. Their designs weren't random. They depicted cosmological symbols, mythical creatures, or the insignia of specific military orders. Imagine a warrior, not just protected by wood and hide, but by a swirling vortex of hummingbird feathers, representing Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. It's a statement piece, to say the least. I'm not just here to fight, I'm here to look fabulous doing it. Then there are the headdresses, some towering several feet high, like shimmering crowns of divine authority. The most famous, of course, is the kind associated with Moctezuma II, a breathtaking construction of hundreds of long, iridescent green Quetzal tail feathers, gold, and other precious materials. Wearing one of these wouldn't just make you taller. It would announce your connection to the heavens, your status as a conduit for the gods. You can almost feel the delicate weight, the way it would shift with every movement, transforming the wearer into something more than human. Good luck trying to get through a standard doorway with one of those, though. Maybe that's why some of those other doorways were so low, a subtle reminder for the elite to duck. Beside the headdresses, you notice intricate tapestries and wall hangings. These aren't woven in the traditional sense, but rather are vast mosaics of feathers attached to a cloth backing. Some depict scenes from mythology, battles, or important ceremonies. Others are purely abstract, mesmerizing patterns of color and texture that seem to shift and change as you look at them. The level of detail is almost unbelievable, a testament to what human hands can achieve with patience and dedication. An odd detail you might observe on some of these larger pieces are tiny, almost invisible stitches or bindings made from human hair or fine plant fibers, used to secure particularly delicate feather arrangements or to reinforce joins between different colored sections. It speaks to the resourcefulness of the Amanteca, using every available material to achieve their artistic vision. And it wasn't just grand, ceremonial items. The Amanteca also created smaller, more personal adornments. intricate ear spools, bracelets, and decorative fans. These were not mere trinkets, they were status symbols, markers of wealth, piety, and social standing. Even the clothing of the elite would be adorned with feather borders or applique. Think of it as the Aztec equivalent of haute couture, where every piece was custom made and breathtakingly expensive, not in mere cacao beans, but in the sheer man hours and rare materials invested. Forget designer handbags. A tiny hummingbird feather earring could probably signal more status. The role of the Amanteca in Aztec society was complex. They were more than just skilled laborers. Because their art was so intertwined with religious ritual and the symbols of power, they held a respected, almost sacred status. They were often organized into guilds, living in their own district, Amantla, as you've seen. Historians still debate the exact level of autonomy these guilds had. Were they directly controlled by the state or the priesthood, commissioned for specific works? Or did they have more artistic freedom, able to innovate and create based on their own inspiration, within the accepted iconographic framework, of course? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a delicate balance between patronage and artistic integrity. You might notice that certain colors and types of feathers seem to be more prominent in some pieces than others. This wasn't accidental. Each bird, each color, had specific symbolic associations. The green of the quetzal represented fertility, preciousness, and the divine. Blue from the lovely cotinga was associated with water and the sky. Red macaw feathers could symbolize fire, blood, or the sun. Yellow often represented gold or sunlight. The Amanteca were masters of this visual language, encoding layers of meaning into their creations that would have been instantly recognizable to the Aztec elite. It's like a secret code, spoken in the silent language of feathers. Imagine trying to decipher that today without a detailed Aztec symbolism for dummies guide. You'd just think, ooh, pretty. As the last light of day truly gives way to the soft glow of the lamps, a sense of quiet industry settles even deeper over the workshop. The workday isn't over for many of these artisans. The demands for their exquisite creations were ceaseless. You feel a profound respect for their skill, their dedication, and the ephemeral beauty they brought into the world. These weren't just objects. They were prayers made visible, status made tangible, and a connection to a cosmos teeming with gods and sacred power, all expressed through the delicate, shimmering medium of feathers. You realize that what you're witnessing is not just art, but a vital organ of the Aztec world, pulsing with color, skill, and deep spiritual significance. The soft glow of the oil lamps in the Amanteca workshop casts long, dancing shadows, and the scent of beeswax and old wood mingles with the faint, dry aroma of the feathers themselves. You've seen the meticulous artistry, the reverence for the materials, but now your mind begins to wander, to ponder the journey of these incredible plumes. They didn't just magically appear in Tenochtitlan. Their story, like the feathered serpents depicted in Aztec art, wends its way through dense jungles, over rugged mountains, and across vast trade networks. You pull your awareness gently from the quiet workshop and find yourself soaring, metaphorically of course, above the Valley of Mexico. Below you, the great city of Tenochtitlan glitters like a jewel in the moonlight, its causeways stretching out like silver ribbons across Lake Texcoco. But your focus shifts outwards, towards the distant provinces, the lush tropical lowlands, and the cloud forests that cling to the slopes of remote mountain ranges. This is where the story of the feathers begins. A primary historical fact is that the Aztec Empire, through a combination of conquest and strategic alliances, controlled a vast territory with diverse ecosystems. This gave them access to an astonishing variety of bird life. Tribute lists from conquered regions, recorded in documents like the Codex Mendoza, meticulously detail the quotas of feathers required from different subject peoples. Imagine being a provincial governor, your main KPI not being gold or maize, but making sure you shipped out your 20,000 hummingbird feathers on time. Talk about pressure from head office, or in this case, the Triple Alliance. Your journey takes you, in this sleepy imagining, to the humid coastal plains of Veracruz or the dense jungles of Chiapas. The air here is thick, alive with the cacophony of unseen creatures. Giant trees form a dense canopy, filtering the sunlight into a dappled green. Here, specialized hunters and trappers, often from local communities with generations of experience, would seek out the birds whose plumage was so highly prized. They didn't always kill the birds. For species like the quetzal, whose long tail feathers were paramount, it's believed that trappers would often capture the birds, carefully pluck the desired plumes, and then release them, allowing the feathers to regrow. It was an early, if somewhat involuntary, form of sustainable harvesting. You have to admire the foresight, or perhaps just the understanding that a dead bird provides feathers only once. It's in these remote regions that you might encounter an odd detail, the use of blowguns and cleverly designed traps. Forget rifles and nets. These hunters used precision and an intimate knowledge of bird behavior. Some traps were simple snares, others more elaborate, using sticky saps to entangle the birds without damaging their precious feathers. The blowguns, firing small clay pellets or darts, required immense skill to stun a bird without killing it, or to bring it down from a high branch. It's a far cry from scrolling through a birdwatching app on your phone. This was extreme ornithology. The journey of these feathers from the remote wilderness to the heart of the empire was an epic in itself. They would be carefully bundled, transported by lines of porters or tlamame, who traversed treacherous mountain passes and dense forests on foot. There were no wheeled vehicles or beasts of burden in Mesoamerica. Everything moved on human shoulders. Imagine caravans of these porters, their backs laden with precious cargo, not just feathers, but also jade, cacao, jaguar pelts, and other exotic goods, all converging on the great markets of Tenochtitlan. These trade routes were the lifeblood of the empire, and the feathers were among their most delicate and valuable currents. Historians still debate the full complexity and control of these trade networks. Were they centrally managed by the Aztec state, with strict oversight and imperial outposts? Or were they more reliant on a web of independent merchants, the Pochteca, who undertook long and dangerous expeditions into foreign territories, sometimes acting as traders, sometimes as spies for the empire? The Pochteca were a fascinating group, a kind of merchant adventurer class, with their own guilds, gods, and distinct privileges. It's likely a combination of both state control and entrepreneurial spirit kept the feathers flowing. They were the original long-haul truckers, just with more snakes and fewer service stations. As you visualize these vibrant plumes making their arduous journey, perhaps protected in light reed baskets or clay pots, you gain a new appreciation for their value. Each feather that arrived in the Amantica's workshop was not just a piece of a bird. It was the culmination of immense effort, specialized knowledge, ecological understanding, and a sophisticated system of tribute and trade. It had traveled hundreds of miles, passed through many hands, and survived the perils of the journey, all to become part of a divine headdress or a warrior's resplendent shield. It makes complaining about a delayed online order seem a tad trivial, doesn't it? The Amanteca were, in a way, the final curators of this long and complex process, transforming raw, natural beauty into artifacts of profound cultural and spiritual meaning. The weight of that responsibility, the sheer preciousness of their medium, must have been ever present in their minds as they worked their ethereal magic. Having traced the incredible journey of the feathers from distant jungles and mountains, you find your awareness gently settling back into the heart of Tenochtitlan, specifically within the hallowed confines of an Amanteca workshop. The air is still thick with focused energy, the soft rustle of plumage and the low murmur of Nahuatl. You've seen what they make and where the materials come from, but now you draw closer to understand how they wrought such wonders and what it meant to be an Amanteca. The training of a featherworker began young. A mainstream historical fact is that children, often as young as 6 or 7, would start learning the craft from their parents or other relatives within the Kalpuli, the guild-like family group. They'd begin with the simplest tasks, sorting feathers by quality and color, a surprisingly difficult job when dealing with subtle iridescent shifts, or preparing the base materials, like spinning the fine cotton thread for backing cloth, or grinding pigments for touch-ups. It was a long apprenticeship, years of patient learning and practice, before they would be entrusted with the most valuable plumes or the most complex designs. Imagine trying to teach a 7-year-old today to handle something more delicate than a smartphone screen. These kids were training for the Feather Olympics from primary school. As they progressed, they would learn the intricate techniques that defined Aztec featherwork. One of the most remarkable was the creation of feather paintings, or mosaics, where tiny pieces of feather were meticulously glued to a paper or cloth base. The Amanteca would often sketch their designs first, sometimes on agave paper, then transfer it. They used natural adhesives, the exact recipes for which were closely guarded secrets, those substances derived from orchid bulbs and other plant resins are commonly believed to have been used. The feathers themselves would be carefully trimmed to shape with razor-sharp obsidian blades, then applied with delicate bone tools or thorns, often overlapping them like scales to create a seamless or shimmering surface. You try to picture the steadiness of hand required, the eye for color and texture. It's less like painting by numbers and more like performing microsurgery with a bird's rainbow. An odd detail about their toolkit is the potential use of their own breath or specialized blowpipes, not for hunting this time, but for manipulating the tiniest, most delicate downy feathers, or for clearing away unwanted fragments without disturbing the work. Imagine an artisan hunched over a piece, gently puffing a wisp of hummingbird breast feather into its perfect place. It's a testament to the incredibly delicate nature of their medium and the ingenious low-tech solutions they devised. No fancy airbrush tools here, just good old lung power and precision. The creation of three-dimensional objects, like fans or the elaborate tassels that adorn shields and garments, required different skills. Sometimes feathers were tied in intricate patterns around a core structure or woven into fine nets. For the grand headdresses, a complex framework of reeds or lightwood would be constructed, and then layers upon layers of feathers would be attached, often involving thousands of individual plumes carefully graded for size and color to create a flowing, dynamic effect. The famous Montezuma's headdress, though its direct connection to Moctezuma II himself is a subject of some scholarly debate, is a prime example, showcasing not just quetzal feathers, but also blue cotinga, pink flamingo, and other brilliant plumes, all mounted on a delicate net-like structure. Speaking of scholarly debates, historians and archaeologists still discuss the exact division of labor within the Amanteca workshops. While it's known that it was often a family affair, the specific roles women played versus men, especially in the more prestigious or ritually significant commissions, aren't always clearly defined in the historical sources. Some sources suggest women were heavily involved in spinning the thread, preparing base textiles, and perhaps even some of the finer, more repetitive feather application, while men might have focused on design, procurement, and the creation of larger, more structurally complex pieces like shields or headdresses. However, it's more likely that roles were flexible and based on skill and experience rather than strictly gendered, especially within a family unit dedicated to such a specialized craft. It wasn't about who should do it, but who could do it best. Probably less bickering about whose turn it was to sort the blue feathers than in some modern households about whose turn it is to do the dishes. Beyond the technical skill, there was also a spiritual dimension to the work of the Amanteca. Given that feathers were seen as sacred, connecting the earthly realm to the divine, the act of working with them was likely imbued with ritual significance. Artisans might have undergone purification rites or made offerings before commencing a particularly important piece. The workshop itself might have been considered a sacred space. While we don't have extensive detailed records of these specific Amanteca rituals, the general Aztec worldview infused every aspect of life with religious meaning. Transforming these potent symbols of gods and natural forces was not a task undertaken lightly. It was a responsibility, a way of maintaining cosmic balance and ensuring the favor of the gods through beautiful, meticulously crafted offerings. Each piece was, in essence, a prayer made tangible, a burst of controlled, sacred beauty. You can imagine a quiet chant or a focused meditation being as much a part of the toolkit as the obsidian blades and bone awls. You're still enveloped in the quiet diligence of the Amanteca workshop, the scent of dust motes dancing in the lamp glow, mixed with something that might be dried flowers or a subtle incense. Having explored their training and techniques, your attention now shifts to their place within the vibrant, complex tapestry of Aztec society. These were not just artisans toiling in obscurity. The Amanteca were vital contributors to the visual and spiritual language of an empire. Their social standing was quite high, certainly above that of common agricultural laborers. A mainstream historical fact is that specialized artisans in Aztec society, including the Amanteca, were often organized into kalpuli, hereditary guilds that had their own neighborhoods, patron deities, and even internal governance. Amantla, the district of the Featherworkers in Tenochtitlan, was one such specialized enclave. This guild structure provided them with a degree of autonomy and collective bargaining power, ensuring their skills were respected and their livelihoods protected, at least to some extent. They weren't quite nobility, but they were definitely VIPs in the craft world. Imagine a sort of ancient celebrity chef, but for feathers. Tonight, on Tenochtitlan's Got Talent, a stunning new shield design from the House of Kotal Feathers. The commissions the Amanteca received were as varied as their clientele. Warriors, eager to display their prowess and honor the gods of war, would seek resplendent battle standards, shields, chimali, and elaborate warrior costumes, tlahuistli. These outfits weren't just for show, they were deeply symbolic, often representing animals like eagles or jaguars, embodying the creature's spirit and power for the wearer. Priests commissioned intricate vestments and regalia for religious ceremonies, headdresses that seemed to touch the heavens, and tapestries to adorn the temples, depicting gods, cosmic events, or scenes from sacred histories. The nobility and the ruling class, the Tlatoani, speakers or ruler, and his court, were perhaps their most important patrons, demanding luxurious garments, fans, jewelry, and diplomatic gifts that showcased the wealth and sophistication of the Aztec state. If you wanted to impress a visiting dignitary, a gift of exquisite featherwork was a surefire way to do it, much classier than a fruit basket. An odd detail that highlights the incredible value placed on their work is found in some of the tribute demands imposed on conquered city-states. It wasn't uncommon for tribute to include not just raw feathers, but also finished featherwork pieces, implying that the skill of provincial artisans was also recognized, or perhaps that the demand in Tenochtitlan was so high they needed to outsource. Some codices even depict specific, named featherwork items being sent as tribute, indicating a high level of specificity and expectation. Imagine your tax bill arriving. Due 1,000 cacao beans, 20 cotton mantles, and one slightly used but still fabulous turquoise feather fan. The symbolism embedded in featherwork was incredibly rich and multi-layered. As you've seen, specific colors and feathers were associated with particular gods, directions, and concepts. The Quetzal, with its vibrant green plumage, was universally prized, symbolizing fertility, preciousness, and often associated with Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity. Hummingbird feathers, tiny and iridescent, were linked to Huitzilopochtli, the Aztec patron god, whose name means hummingbird of the south or left-handed hummingbird. The way feathers were arranged, the patterns they formed, all contributed to a complex visual language that conveyed power, piety, and cosmic order. Deciphering this language today is a significant scholarly endeavor. Historians still debate the precise meanings of certain recurring motifs or combinations of symbols found in surviving featherwork pieces. Are they purely decorative, or do they represent specific lineages, historical events, or astronomical observations? Unlocking these visual codes is like trying to read a beautiful, ancient language where half the dictionary is missing. Sadly, the ultimate fate of much of this breathtaking artistry was ephemeral. Feathers, by their very nature, are fragile and susceptible to decay, insects, and moisture. While some pieces were carefully preserved, many were used in ceremonies and then ritually burned or buried as offerings. Warrior costumes, though stunning, were subjected to the rigors of, albeit often ritualized, combat. And then, of course, came the Spanish conquest. While the conquistadors were initially awestruck by the beauty of Aztec featherwork, Cortes himself sent several pieces back to Spain as marvels of the New World. The subsequent collapse of the Aztec Empire, the suppression of its religion, and the disruption of traditional craft systems led to a dramatic decline in this art form. Some Amanteca did continue to practice their craft under Spanish rule, adapting their skills to create Christian religious imagery or European-style decorative items. These feather paintings often depicted saints, biblical scenes, or coats of arms, blending indigenous techniques with new subject matter. It was a testament to their adaptability, but the original spiritual context and the grand scale of imperial patronage were largely lost. You can almost feel a quiet sigh in the workshop, a premonition of a changing world where the demand for god images made of quetzal feathers would soon be replaced by demands for more solid gold. The intrinsic value remained, but the cultural currency was about to be drastically reevaluated. Yet the legacy of those master artisans, their incredible skill, and the ethereal beauty they coaxed from nature, continues to shimmer, a faint but dazzling echo from a lost world. The flickering lamplight in the imagined Amanteca workshop seems to dip a little, casting longer, more somber shadows. The air, once vibrant with the promise of creation for an empire at its zenith, now carries a subtle undercurrent of change, of a world irrevocably altered. You sense the shift, the spiritual and political earthquake that was the Spanish conquest, and how its tremors reached even into these sanctuaries of art and tradition. As the Aztec Empire crumbled in the early 16th century, so too did the intricate social and religious structures that had nurtured the art of the Amanteca. A primary historical fact is that with the fall of Tenochtitlan and the imposition of Spanish colonial rule, the traditional patronage system for featherworkers largely disappeared. The temples that once demanded opulent hangings and priestly regalia were destroyed or repurposed. The warrior societies, with their magnificent feathered costumes and shields, were disbanded. The Aztec nobility, who had adorned themselves and their palaces with these symbols of wealth and power, were stripped of their authority and often their riches. Suddenly, the primary customers for works depicting Huitzilopochtli or Quetzalcoatl were, to put it mildly, no longer in the market. It's like being the world's best blacksmith, making horseshoes the day after the Model T rolls out. However, the incredible skill of the Amanteca did not vanish overnight. Some artisans, displaying remarkable resilience and adaptability, began to create featherwork for new patrons, the Spanish colonists and the Christian Church. They applied their ancient techniques to new subjects, producing intricate feather paintings, pinturas de plumeria, that depicted Christian saints, biblical scenes, and European coats of arms. These pieces were often astonishingly detailed, mimicking the appearance of oil paintings, but with the unique, shimmering texture that only feathers could provide. Some were sent back to Europe, where they were marveled at as exotic curiosities from the New World, showcasing the cleverness of the indigenous peoples, albeit now channeled into approved subject matter. An odd detail from this transitional period is the creation of liturgical items like bishops' mitres and altar frontals, entirely or partially out of feathers. Imagine a solemn Catholic Mass, the bishop presiding in a mitre that shimmered with the iridescent blues of the cotinga and the greens of the quetzal, feathers perhaps once intended for a depiction of Tlaloc, the rain god. It's a fascinating example of syncretism, where indigenous artistry was co-opted and transformed to serve the new religious order. It's a bit like your favorite indie band suddenly doing commercial jingles. The skill is there, but the soul feels different. Yet despite these adaptations, the scale and significance of featherworking inevitably diminished. The vast networks that supplied rare feathers from distant tropical forests were disrupted. The sacred meaning embedded in the traditional designs was suppressed, deemed pagan idolatry. The number of practicing Amantica dwindled as apprenticeships became less viable, and the old knowledge was not always passed on with the same urgency or completeness. The old gods were officially silent, and their feathered messengers, it seemed, were also fading from view. Historians still debate the extent to which traditional Aztec religious symbolism subtly persisted in these colonial-era featherworks. Were there hidden meanings, coded messages woven into the arrangements of feathers, understandable only to those who still remembered the old ways? Or were the artisans simply applying their technical skills to new imposed iconographies without that deeper layer of pre-Hispanic spiritual intent? It's difficult to say definitively. Some scholars see traces of indigenous cosmology in the choice of colors or the subtle stylization of figures, while others argue that such interpretations are speculative. It's like trying to read between the lines of a beautifully illuminated manuscript, searching for a whisper of rebellion or remembrance in a saint's feathered robe. The loss of so many featherwork masterpieces is one of the great tragedies of this period. Because of their organic nature, many simply did not survive the centuries. Others were deliberately destroyed during the efforts to eradicate indigenous religion. Only a handful of pre-Hispanic featherwork pieces exist today, scattered in museums across Europe and Mexico. Each one is an almost miraculous survivor, a fragile testament to an extraordinary art form. Items like the Montezuma's headdress in Vienna or the feather shields in Stuttgart and Mexico City are priceless windows into that lost world. Holding one, or even just being in its presence, you can almost feel the echoes of the Amanteca's dedication, the vibrancy of the Aztec court, the deep spiritual currents that flowed through every plume. It's a sobering thought, how much beauty can be erased, how much skill can be forgotten when worlds collide. Yet the fact that any survive at all is a testament to their perceived value, even by those who sought to dismantle the culture that created them. You linger in that space of contemplation, thinking about the fragility of art and the tides of history. The imagined workshop around you now feels more like a museum of memory, a quiet tribute to the Amanteca and their lost worlds. While so much was lost, the story doesn't entirely end with suppression and decline. Instead, it shifts into a new phase, one of rediscovery, appreciation, and the painstaking effort to understand these masters of an ethereal art. The few pre-Hispanic Aztec featherwork pieces that have survived are now global treasures, residing in museums far from their origin in Tenochtitlan. A mainstream historical fact, is that perhaps the most famous of these is the so-called headdress of Moctezuma, now housed in the Weltmuseum Wien in Vienna, Austria. This spectacular creation, composed of hundreds of quetzal tail feathers, gold ornaments, and other precious plumes, is a breathtaking example of the Amanteca's skill. Its journey to Europe is shrouded in some mystery, likely sent by Hernan Cortés himself to Emperor Charles V in the 1520s. Its very presence in Europe, so far from the heart of the Aztec Empire, underscores the global shifts in power that occurred. Mexico has, for many years, requested its return, a poignant reminder of the complex issues surrounding cultural heritage and colonial legacies. Other remarkable survivors include several chimali or shields, for instance, the Ahuitzotl shield, now in the Museum der Weltkulturen, Frankfurt, though its exact attribution is debated, and another stunning shield in the Württemberg State Museum in Stuttgart, Germany, showcase dynamic, abstract designs and fierce mythical creatures rendered in vibrant feather mosaic. In Mexico itself, the Museo Nacional de Antropología in Mexico City holds a few precious examples, including some later colonial pieces that demonstrate the evolution of the art form. Each of these objects is a silent ambassador from a vibrant past, whispering tales of gods, warriors, and an artistic tradition that valued the ephemeral beauty of feathers above almost all else. Seeing one is like spotting a quetzal in the wild, a rare, breathtaking glimpse of something truly special. Good luck getting one through customs if you tried to borrow it from a museum. Those things are guarded better than most national treasuries. In recent decades, there has been a resurgence of interest in Aztec featherwork, not just among historians and museum curators, but also among contemporary artists and craftspeople. An odd detail in this modern revival is the experimental archaeology undertaken by some artisans and scholars to replicate the ancient techniques. This involves painstaking research into historical accounts, close examination of surviving pieces, often using advanced imaging techniques, and attempts to rediscover the lost recipes for natural adhesives and the methods for preparing and applying feathers. Imagine trying to figure out the exact species of orchid needed for the perfect glue, based on a vague 400-year-old description. It's like extreme historical craft detective work, a CSI, Tenochtitlan, for art supplies. These revival efforts are incredibly challenging. The specific bird species are often endangered or protected, making access to authentic materials difficult and ethically complex. The knowledge of the exact techniques, once passed down through generations of a manteca, was broken, and reconstructing it is a slow, meticulous process. Yet the artists who undertake this work are driven by a passion to connect with their heritage and to keep this unique art form alive, even if in a modified contemporary context. Some create stunning new pieces, inspired by ancient designs, while others focus on conservation and restoration of the fragile originals. Historians and art historians still actively debate the interpretation of the iconography on the surviving pieces. For example, the precise meaning of the geometric patterns on some shields or the specific identity of certain zoomorphic figures can be elusive. Without more surviving codices or contemporary accounts directly explaining these specific artworks, scholars must piece together clues from broader Aztec cosmology, mythology, and linguistic analysis. It's a complex puzzle where many pieces are missing, and interpretations can vary widely, leading to lively academic discussion. Is that swirling pattern a representation of wind, water, or the cyclical nature of time? The Amanteca knew, but they didn't exactly leave behind an artist's statement for every piece. As you reflect on this journey through the world of Aztec featherworkers, from the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan to the quiet intensity of their workshops, from the remote jungles where the feathers were sourced to the modern museums where their creations are now treasured, you're left with a sense of profound admiration. These were artisans who worked with one of nature's most delicate and beautiful materials, transforming it into objects of immense power, spiritual significance, and breathtaking artistry. Their legacy, though fragmented, continues to inspire awe and wonder. The vibrant colors may have faded slightly on some surviving pieces. The once perfectly aligned feathers may show the gentle wear of centuries, but the spirit of the Amanteca, their dedication, their skill, their ability to capture the ethereal and make it tangible, shines through. Their art reminds us that beauty can be found in the most unexpected places, and that even the most fragile creations can leave an indelible mark on history, a soft, shimmering echo that still resonates today, inviting you to look closer, to appreciate the skill, and to dream of a world painted with feathers. And now, as our exploration of the Aztec featherworkers gently comes to a close, allow the vibrant images to soften, the intricate details to blur at the edges of your mind. The bustling causeways of Tenochtitlan recede, the sharp calls of vendors fading into a distant murmur. The intense focus of the Amanteca workshop softens, the myriad colors of Quetzal, Cotinga, and macaw feathers beginning to blend into a soothing, hazy palette. Feel the weight of the day, the stories you've heard, settle comfortably around you, like a soft, feathered mantle, light and reassuring. There are no more obsidian blades to consider, no complex tribute lists to decipher, only the gentle, rhythmic cadence of your own breath. The air in your room is calm and still, a gentle contrast to the imagined mountain breezes or the humid jungle air where brilliant birds once flew. Let any lingering thoughts of ancient rituals or the shimmer of gold and jade simply drift away, like feathers caught on a gentle updraft, spiraling slowly out of sight, leaving behind only a sense of peace. The dedication of those artisans, their patient hands, now translates into a quiet permission for your own mind to rest, to release any tension it might be holding. Each tiny feather they placed with such care can now be a tiny thought you allow to float away, making space for stillness. The soft glow of imaginary oil lamps dims further and further until only the comfortable darkness of your own resting place remains, safe and serene. There is nothing more to analyze, nothing more to learn for tonight, only the deep, restorative embrace of sleep. Hey there, folks. Tonight we're pedaling back in time to an era of corsets, top hats, and some truly peculiar medical panics. Imagine scrolling through your social media feed today and seeing dire warnings that say using your smartphone too much will permanently alter your facial features into a texting grimace, or that binge watching your favorite series could lead to Netflix forehead. Sounds a bit silly, right? Well, tonight, we're exploring a very real and very strange public worry from the late 19th century, the dreaded bicycle face. Yes, you heard that right. As bicycles became all the rage, particularly for women, A curious ailment supposedly began to afflict these new riders, contorting their pretty, placid expressions into something else. Now, while we chuckle at this from our modern, hopefully non bicycle faced vantage point, it's worth remembering that if you were a woman in the 1800s, you would have been expected to wear a corset. 1890s, daring to enjoy a bit of wheeled freedom, you probably wouldn't have survived this wave of societal side-eye without at least a little public shaming. It was a different time when new technologies and changing social roles could stir up some truly wild anxieties. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment down below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's dim the lights, turn on your fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself on a bustling cobblestone street in London, or perhaps Boston, or Paris. The bicycle craze was an international phenomenon. It's the 1890s, the gay 90s, as they're sometimes called, though for many, especially women, life was still tightly corseted by social convention. The air is a mix of coal smoke, horse manure, a very real olfactory presence back then, alas, and the scent of roasting chestnuts from a nearby vendor. The clip-clop of hooves and the rumble of ironclad carriage wheels are the dominant sounds, but increasingly they're joined by a newer, quieter whirring. The sound of bicycle chains and rubber tires gliding over the uneven pavement. You see them everywhere, the bicycles. Not the sleek, featherlight to carbon fiber machines of today, but their heavier, more upright ancestors. The safety bicycle, with its two equally sized wheels, a significant improvement over the precarious high wheelers, or penny farthings, that only the most daring or foolhardy men typically rode. And most strikingly, you see women riding them. This is new. This is revolutionary. And for some, this is deeply alarming. A mainstream historical fact is that the rise of the safety bicycle in the 1880s and 1890s offered an unprecedented level of independent mobility, especially for women. Suddenly, a woman could travel relatively quickly and easily without needing a horse, a carriage, or a male escort. She could visit friends, run errands, explore the countryside, or even commute to one of the new types of jobs opening up for women in offices and shops. This newfound freedom was exhilarating for many, but it also challenged traditional gender roles and notions of female delicacy and domesticity. If women were out gallivanting on bicycles, who was minding them well, whatever it was they were supposed to be minding? Probably the anti-macassars. As you watch these women pedal by, their skirts, often modified for cycling, perhaps shorter or even bloomers, another source of societal pearl clutching, brushing against the frames, you might notice the expressions on their faces. Some look determined, focused on navigating the traffic and the bumps. Others look joyful, exhilarated by the speed and the fresh air. But according to a growing chorus of medical men, journalists, and concerned social commentators, these women were risking something terrible, the development of bicycle face. What exactly was bicycle face? Well, descriptions varied, but it was generally characterized by a strained, worried, or tense expression, often with a flushed complexion, bulging eyes, and a clenched jaw. Some accounts even suggested a permanent hardening of the features, a loss of feminine softness. An odd detail often included in these descriptions was a peculiar droop of the eyelids, or a haunted, faraway look. It sounded less like the result of a pleasant bike ride, and more like you'd just seen a ghost while simultaneously trying to solve a complex math problem. It's almost as if they were describing someone, you know, concentrating while operating a newfangled machine in traffic. Radical. Historians still debate the true origins and motivations behind the bicycle face scare. Was it genuine medical concern, albeit misguided by the era's limited understanding of physiology and the anxieties surrounding new technology? Or was it, as many contemporary feminists and cycling advocates suspected, a thinly veiled attempt to discourage women from embracing the bicycle and the independence it represented? The arguments were often couched in terms of protecting women's delicate health, their beauty, and their nervous systems, which were widely believed to be more fragile than men's. It's a classic case of, "We're saying this for your own good, ladies. Now please step away from the two-wheeled freedom machine." You might overhear snippets of conversation, concerned mutters from onlookers, as a group of women in smart cycling outfits whiz past. "Look at her, poor dear. She'll have the bicycle face by tea time." Or perhaps you pick up a newspaper, its pages filled with articles solemnly discussing this new affliction. Medical journals published papers on it. Popular magazines offered advice on how to avoid it, perhaps by maintaining a perfectly placid expression while riding, which, if you've ever hit an unexpected pothole, you'll know is easier said than done. Imagine trying to maintain serene Mona Lisa vibes while dodging a horse-drawn omnibus. The sheer effort would probably give you some other kind of face. The irony, of course, is that cycling was, for many, a source of improved health, fitness, and mental well-being. It offered an escape from stuffy Victorian parlors, a chance for physical exertion, and a sense of empowerment. But in a society grappling with rapid change, the image of a woman freely, even athletically, propelling herself through public spaces was for some a change too far, too fast. And so, bicycle face became a curious footnote in the history of moral panics, a symptom of a society pedaling, sometimes awkwardly, towards modernity. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows down the cobblestone streets, and the whir of bicycle wheels seems to grow more insistent, a soundtrack to this changing world. You're still immersed in the 1890s, a time when the simple act of riding a bicycle could apparently turn a woman's face into a medical exhibit. Let's pedal a little deeper into just what this bicycle face was supposed to entail and the rather creative explanations offered for its existence. The descriptions of bicycle face were wonderfully, if alarmingly, specific. It wasn't just a general look of exertion. We're talking about a permanently hard, clenched jaw and eyes that were either staring or bulging, often accompanied by a drawn, anxious expression. One medical man, A. Shadwell, writing in a prominent medical journal in 1897, a mainstream historical fact, described it as a face, usually flushed, but sometimes pale, often with lips more or less drawn, and the beginning of dark shadows under the eyes, and always with an expression of weariness. It sounds less like someone enjoying a new hobby, and more like they'd just pulled an all-nighter preparing for their final exams, fueled only by weak tea and existential dread. Beyond the general weariness and the perpetually startled look, some commentators got even more detailed. They spoke of a distinct forward set of the chin, a tightening of the lips, and even a slight knitting of the brows. The overall effect was supposedly a loss of feminine softness and placid repose, replaced by a look of constant strain and alertness. It's as if the very act of balancing, steering, and propelling the bicycle was etching itself permanently onto women's faces. You have to wonder if men who rode bicycles were also afflicted, or if their faces were just naturally considered more ruggedly bicycle ready. Perhaps bicycle beard or handlebar mustache droop just didn't have the same ring to it. Now, the explanations for why this terrifying facial transformation was occurring were a delightful mix of Victorian medical theory, pseudoscience, and good old-fashioned anxiety about women getting ideas above their station. One common theory was the sheer physical exertion involved. Remember, these early bicycles were heavy, roads were often rough, and women's clothing, even modified cycling attire, could be restrictive. The argument went that the constant effort of pedaling, balancing, and navigating led to this strained facial expression, which, if indulged in too frequently, would become permanent. It's the Victorian equivalent of being told, if the wind changes, your face will stick like that. Another charming idea was that the constant vibration from the bicycle jiggling over uneven surfaces was somehow shaking women's delicate nervous systems into a state of permanent agitation reflected in their faces. Then there was the wind theory, that the unaccustomed rushing of air against the face as one sped along at perhaps a dizzying 10 miles per hour was somehow deforming the facial muscles. An odd detail here is that some advice columns even suggested women wear veils while cycling, not just for modesty or to protect their complexions from sun and dust, but specifically to shield their faces from the dangerous, face-altering wind. One imagines these veiled cyclists, phantom figures whirring through the streets, desperately trying to preserve their feminine repose against the onslaught of a gentle breeze. Of course, underlying many of these medicalized explanations were deeper societal anxieties. The bicycle was a symbol of freedom and autonomy, and bicycle face became a convenient, medical-sounding way to pathologize that freedom. If cycling made women look haggard, strained, and unfeminine, well then perhaps they shouldn't be doing it. It was a way of subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, reinforcing traditional gender roles. The ideal Victorian woman was supposed to be demure, domestic, and focused on her home and family. A woman with bicycle face, by contrast, looked like she'd been out in the world, exerting herself, possibly even thinking for herself. The horror. Historians still debate how widespread the actual belief in bicycle face was among the general populace versus how much it was a media-driven phenomenon, amplified by sensationalist journalism and conservative commentators. Were women genuinely worried about their faces contorting, or did they mostly roll their eyes at these pronouncements and carry on cycling? Evidence suggests a bit of both. Some women undoubtedly took the warnings seriously, given the authority often ascribed to medical pronouncements at the time. Others, particularly those involved in the burgeoning women's suffrage and emancipation movements, saw bicycle face for what it largely was, a social control mechanism. They countered with articles praising the health benefits of cycling, the rosy complexions it produced, and the sheer joy and liberation it offered. Still, the term bicycle face lingered in the air, a curious ailment born of a society grappling with the velocipede and the new woman it seemed to be creating, one strained, bulging-eyed expression at a time. It makes you wonder what they'd have made of a spin class, probably recommended smelling salts, and a fainting couch for recovery. The gas lamps are beginning to hiss to life along the Victorian streets, casting pools of yellow light on the still bustling thoroughfares. Carriages clatter by, and amidst them the determined whirring of bicycle wheels continues, a subtle but persistent challenge to the old order. You're still wrapped in the peculiar anxieties of the 1890s, where the simple act of a woman riding a bicycle could apparently lead to a permanent case of resting bike face, as we might ironically call it today. The bicycle face scare didn't exist in a vacuum. It was deeply intertwined with the broader social upheavals of the late Victorian era, particularly the rise of the new woman. This was a term often used pejoratively by critics to describe women who were challenging traditional gender roles by seeking education, employment, and greater independence in their personal and public lives. A mainstream historical fact is that the bicycle became a powerful symbol and a practical tool for these new women. It allowed them to travel independently, to participate in sports and recreation, and to literally expand their horizons beyond the domestic sphere. Naturally, this made some segments of society deeply uncomfortable, and bicycle face became one of the many supposed dangers these adventurous women faced. Careful now, ladies. All that education and fresh air might lead to unbecoming facial expressions, and heaven forbid, opinions. Fashion, too, played a significant role in this drama. Traditional Victorian women's attire, with its tight corsets, long heavy skirts, and elaborate bustles, was utterly impractical for cycling. This led to the adoption of more rational dress, including shorter skirts, divided skirts, or even bloomers, baggy trousers gathered at the knee. These outfits, while far more sensible for pedaling, were often seen as shocking, even scandalous, as they dared to reveal the female form, or at least the suggestion of legs, in a way that was considered unladylike or even immodest. So not only were women supposedly risking bicycle face, they were also flouting fashion conventions and notions of public decorum. It was a double whammy for the traditionalists. Their faces were going to pot, and their ankles were showing. The scandal. Proponents of women's cycling and early feminist thinkers were quick to push back against the bicycle face narrative. Figures like Susan B. Anthony, a prominent American suffragist, famously said that the bicycle had done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. She saw it as a tool for freedom, health, and self-reliance. Many articles in women's magazines and cycling publications of the time extolled the virtues of bicycling, describing the rosy glow of health it imparted, the sparkle in the eye, and the overall improvement in fitness and spirits. They directly countered the dire warnings of bicycle face, portraying it as a ridiculous invention designed to keep women in their place. An odd detail here is that some of these pro-cycling articles even offered tips on how to look graceful and composed while riding, implicitly acknowledging the pressure women felt to maintain a certain aesthetic even while engaging in this liberating activity. It was less about preventing a medical condition and more about managing public perception. Yes, you can be free, but please try to look effortlessly pretty while doing it. The humor wasn't lost on everyone, even at the time. Satirical cartoons and witty commentaries poked fun at the bicycle face panic. One can imagine drawing comparisons to other afflictions, perhaps omnibus eyebrow from squinting to see if the bus was coming, or telegram jaw from clenching in anticipation of news. The whole concept was ripe for parody, highlighting the absurdity of attributing such dire facial consequences to a pleasant pastime. Historians still debate how much of the bicycle face scare was genuinely driven by medical ignorance versus how much was a conscious or subconscious backlash against female empowerment. The late Victorian era was a period of intense anxiety about changing social norms, the perceived decline of traditional values, and the shifting roles of men and women. The bicycle, in this context, wasn't just a mode of transport, it was a cultural catalyst, and bicycle face, in its own strange way, became a focal point for these anxieties, a medicalized metaphor for the perceived unsexing or masculinization of women who dared to pedal their own way into the future. It's a bit like how every new technology today, from video games to social media, gets blamed for some new societal ill or physical ailment. Apparently, human beings have a long and storied tradition of being slightly terrified of anything new and fun, especially if women are enjoying it a bit too much. As the evening deepens and the last few cyclists make their way home, their lamps cutting modest beams through the twilight, the idea of bicycle face starts to seem less like a medical diagnosis and more like a collective societal eye twitch. It was a curious moment when progress and panic briefly rode side by side, leaving us with a fascinating and faintly amusing chapter in the history of how we view women, technology, and the ever-changing landscape of social norms. The gaslight hums softly, casting a gentle flickering glow, and the sounds of the 19th century city, the distant clatter of hooves, a lone dog barking, perhaps the faint melody of a parlor piano, provide a soothing backdrop. You've explored the what and the why of the curious bicycle face phenomenon, that supposed affliction waiting to pounce on any woman daring enough to mount a two-wheeled steed. Now let's delve into who exactly was peddling these alarming notions, and how the message was amplified through the media of the day. The voices warning against the perils of bicycle face were often those considered authorities in Victorian society, primarily medical doctors and influential journalists. A mainstream historical fact is that several articles appeared in respected medical journals, such as The Lancet and the British Medical Journal, discussing the physiological strains of cycling on women. While not all of them explicitly diagnosed bicycle face as a distinct, permanent condition, they contributed to an atmosphere of concern about the potential negative health impacts of this new craze, especially on the supposedly more delicate female constitution. These weren't obscure quacks. Well, not all of them. Some were established physicians lending their professional weight to these anxieties. It's like when a celebrity doctor today warns about the dangers of, say, gluten, and suddenly everyone's inspecting their bread with suspicion. Newspapers and popular magazines, always eager for a sensational story, eagerly picked up on these medical concerns and often amplified them. You can imagine the headlines: "The Bicycle Scourge," or "Are Women Sacrificing Their Beauty for a Fad?" or "Doctors Warn, The Hidden Dangers of the Wheel, A Haggard Face, the Price of Freedom. These articles would feature quotes from concerned physicians, often anonymous, or leading specialists, describing the telltale signs of bicycle face with grave authority. They painted vivid pictures of formerly lovely young women whose features had become hardened and strained from too much time in the saddle. It was the clickbait of its day, designed to provoke alarm and, of course, sell more papers. Never let a good public panic go to waste when there are subscriptions to be had, right? One of the most frequently cited proponents of the bicycle face theory, or at least a key figure in popularizing the concerns, was the British physician A. Shadwell, whom we met briefly earlier. His 1897 article in the National Review titled "The Hidden Dangers of Cycling" was particularly influential. He didn't just focus on the face. He worried about the strain on the heart, the nerves, and the overall feminine organization. But the description of the bicycle face, flushed, lips more or less drawn, dark shadows under the eyes, an expression of weariness, became a key takeaway. It's important to note that Shadwell and others often framed their concerns as paternalistic care, a desire to protect women from their own misguided enthusiasm. We're not saying you can't cycle, dear ladies. We're just saying you'll look dreadful and possibly damage your internal organs if you do. How thoughtful. An odd detail from this period is the emergence of specific anti-bicycle face beauty advice in women's magazines. Alongside articles warning of the condition, you might find others offering tips on how to maintain a serene and pleasant expression while cycling. This could involve conscious muscle control, specific breathing techniques, or even the application of certain creams and lotions beforehand, presumably to fortify the face against the rigors of a 10-mile-per-hour wind. Imagine a cycling manual that included a chapter on facial composure in the face of potholes. It's a rather comical image, women grimly trying to maintain beatific smiles while navigating treacherous cobblestones and horse-drawn traffic. However, it's crucial to remember that not everyone was buying into the bicycle face hysteria. Alongside the alarmist voices, there were many doctors, journalists, and most importantly, female cyclists themselves who ridiculed the idea. A significant counter-argument, often voiced in women's publications and by cycling enthusiasts, was that cycling actually improved one's appearance and health. They spoke of the cycling glow, the bright eyes and rosy cheeks that came from fresh air and exercise. They argued that the supposed strained look was simply the look of concentration, or perhaps the joyful exertion of newfound freedom. Many prominent female figures and writers championed the bicycle as a source of empowerment and well-being, dismissing bicycle face as nonsense. One can almost hear them saying, "Actually, doctor." Shadwell, it's called not being confined to a stuffy drawing room all day face, and it's fabulous. Historians still debate the extent to which the bicycle face scare was connected to other health fads and anxieties prevalent in the Victorian era. This was a time of great concern about neurasthenia or nervous exhaustion, a somewhat nebulously defined condition often attributed to the stresses of modern life. It was also an era fascinated by physiognomy, the idea that one's character and health could be read from facial features. In this context, the idea that a new, potentially disruptive activity like cycling could physically manifest its negative effects on the face fit neatly into existing cultural anxieties and pseudoscientific beliefs. Bicycle face, in some ways, was just another symptom in a long list of things Victorians worried about, from the dangers of reading novels, especially for women, as it might overstimulate their imaginations, to the ill effects of improperly ventilated rooms. It seems every era needs its peculiar health scares to keep people on their toes, or in this case, to try and keep women off their wheels. The soft, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in a nearby Victorian hallway seems to underscore the slow, steady march of progress, even as societal anxieties tried to pump the brakes. We've identified the experts and the eager media who fanned the flames of the bicycle face panic. But what was the actual impact of these dire warnings? Did women abandon their beloved bicycles in droves, terrified of their faces freezing into a permanent grimace of exertion? Well, not exactly. While the bicycle face scare certainly generated a lot of discussion and probably caused some genuine concern, especially among more timid or socially conservative individuals, a mainstream historical fact is that the cycling boom among women continued largely unabated through the 1890s. For many women, the tangible benefits of cycling, the freedom, the exercise, the sheer joy of movement, far outweighed the nebulous threat of developing an unflattering facial expression. They might have read the articles, perhaps even chuckled at them with their cycling companions, and then hopped right back on their Rovers or Columbias. It seems the allure of the open road, even if it was just a trip to the lending library or a picnic in the park, was a powerful antidote to fear-mongering. You can imagine them thinking, "Bicycle face? Darling, that's just the look of me out peddling your outdated notions." However, the scare wasn't entirely without effect. It certainly provided ammunition for those who wished to control women's behavior and restrict their newfound mobility. Husbands, its fathers, and brothers, perhaps genuinely concerned or simply resistant to change, could point to these medical warnings as a reason why their female relatives should limit their cycling or avoid it altogether. "You see, my dear, Dr. Pompous Featherbottom himself says it will ruin your delicate complexion and lead to an unseemly jawline. Perhaps stick to needlepoint." It became another tool in the arsenal of patriarchal control, cloaked in the guise of concern for women's health and beauty. An odd detail that emerged from this era was the way bicycle face became entangled with discussions about female nervousness and mental health. Some commentators suggested that the intense concentration required for cycling, the constant need to balance and navigate, was simply too much for the female nervous system to handle, leading not only to bicycle face, but also to heightened anxiety, irritability, and even hysteria, that classic Victorian catch-all for any female behavior deemed inconvenient or overly emotional. So not only would cycling make you look strange, it would also make you act strangely. It's a wonder they didn't blame it for improperly brewed tea or a sudden disinterest in discussing doilies. The broader implications for women's health, had the scare been more effective, could have been quite negative. Cycling offered a rare opportunity for vigorous physical activity at a time when women's exercise options were often limited to genteel walks or carefully prescribed calisthenics. To discourage it based on such flimsy, appearance-focused reasoning was to deny women a significant avenue for improving their physical and mental well-being. Thankfully, many women saw through this. They formed cycling clubs, embarked on long-distance tours, and wrote enthusiastically about the health benefits they experienced: stronger bodies, clearer minds, and a joyful sense of accomplishment. They were essentially conducting their own large-scale experiment, and the results were overwhelmingly positive. Bicycle face be darned. The humorous and satirical responses to Bicycle Face were perhaps some of the most effective countermeasures. Punch magazine, known for its witty cartoons and social commentary, certainly had its fun with the concept. You can picture cartoons of women with exaggeratedly grimacing faces whizzing past horrified onlookers, or perhaps a bicycle face recovery kit advertised with tongue firmly in cheek, containing smelling salts, a tiny parasol, and a manual on how to re-soften your features after a brisk ride. Laughter then as now was a powerful way to deflate pomposity and expose absurdity. If you can make people laugh at a scare tactic, it loses much of its power. It's hard to be terrified of something you're currently snickering at. Historians still debate the precise moment when the bicycle face panic truly began to fade. There wasn't a single event, but rather a gradual decline as the novelty of women cycling wore off, as more and more women demonstrably failed to develop permanently contorted faces, and as the bicycle became an increasingly accepted and normal part of everyday life. The sheer number of women joyfully and healthily riding bicycles eventually provided more compelling evidence than any number of alarmist articles. Plus, as the 20th century loomed, new anxieties and new technologies would soon arrive to capture the public's worried imagination. Perhaps the automobile brought motor face, characterized by a windswept look and a slight squint from trying to see through a dusty windscreen. Every era gets the medical panics it deserves, it seems. For the 1890s, bicycle face was a perfect, if peculiar, fit for a society peddling uncertainly into a new age of female emancipation. The city around you is settling into the deeper quiet of evening, though the occasional late-night cyclist might still be heard, their lamp a fleeting firefly in the gloom. You're still sifting through the curious societal dust devil that was the bicycle face scare, looking beyond the surface-level absurdity to the anxieties churning beneath. It wasn't just about strained expressions or a loss of feminine softness. This panic tapped into some of the Victorian era's deepest-seated fears about women's bodies, their roles, and the relentless advance of modernity. Beneath the overt concerns about facial aesthetics and nervous strain, there often lay a more unspoken, yet potent anxiety, the perceived threat that cycling posed to female reproductive health and sexuality. A mainstream historical fact is that Victorian medical discourse frequently linked women's physical activities to their reproductive capacity. Any strenuous or unladylike pursuit was viewed with suspicion, feared to potentially damage delicate reproductive organs, interfere with menstruation, or even render women infertile. The bicycle, with its straddling posture and the potential for vigorous exertion, became a target for these anxieties. Though bicycle face itself was about facial appearance, it was often part of a larger package of warnings about how cycling could fundamentally harm a woman's true purpose, motherhood. It's a bit like those old wives' tales about not swimming after you eat, but with much higher stakes and a lot more societal judgment. Some medical commentators hinted darkly that the constant jarring and pressure from the bicycle saddle could lead to internal problems, or even, heaven forbid, unhealthy stimulation. The bicycle seat itself became an object of intense scrutiny and design modification, with numerous patents for hygienic or anatomically correct saddles for women, all aimed at mitigating these perceived dangers. An odd detail is the sheer variety and sometimes bizarre designs of these specialized saddles, some with extra padding, some with cutouts, some with peculiar springs and levers, all trying to protect women from the supposed ill effects of sitting on a bike. It makes you wonder if there was a saddle sore scowl that was considered a precursor to full-blown bicycle face. The scientific methods used to diagnose or study bicycle face were by modern standards virtually non-existent. There were no controlled studies, no objective measurements. Diagnoses were based on anecdotal observations, often filtered through the lens of pre-existing biases about female frailty. A doctor might observe a female cyclist looking flushed and focused after a ride and immediately interpret this as the early stages of bicycle face, rather than say the normal physiological response to exercise. It was a classic case of confirmation bias, where experts saw what they expected or wanted to see. If a woman who cycled subsequently suffered from headaches or nervousness, common ailments of the time for a myriad of reasons, the bicycle was an easy scapegoat. Ah, yes, madam, a clear case of advanced bicycle face affecting the nervous system. I prescribe less pedaling and more fainting gracefully onto a chaise lounge. While much of the bicycle face discourse centered on women, it's important to remember that new technologies often provoke broader societal anxieties about the changing pace of life and the unnatural stresses of modernity. The late 19th century was a period of rapid industrialization, urbanization, and technological advancement. The train, the telegraph, and now the bicycle were all compressing time and space, altering how people lived, worked, and interacted. Some historians argue that bicycle face can also be seen as a symptom of this wider technophobia, a fear that these new machines were not just changing society, but also physically and mentally overwhelming their human users. Women, often seen as more sensitive and vulnerable to the shocks of modern life, simply became the primary canvas onto which these fears were projected. It wasn't just about their faces, it was about the face of a rapidly changing world, and some people clearly didn't like the look of it. The idea that an activity could so specifically target and deform one part of the body, the face, while leaving the rest presumably untouched, unless you count the damaged reproductive organs, of course, also speaks to the rather simplistic and mechanistic view of the human body prevalent at the time. It was as if the face was a direct readout of moral and physical strain, a billboard advertising one's conformity or deviation from expected norms. There was little room for the idea that an expression could be fleeting, or that physical exertion could be healthy and invigorating rather than inherently damaging. It makes you appreciate modern sports science, which would probably just tell you to hydrate and stretch, rather than diagnosing you with tennis elbow face or weightlifter's grimace. As you ponder these deeper currents, the absurdity of bicycle face begins to morph into something more understandable, if no less misguided. It was a product of its time, a complex knot of medical ignorance, social conservatism, gender bias, and a generalized fear of change. The bicycle, a simple machine of cogs and wheels, became a lightning rod for all these anxieties, and women's faces became the unwilling battleground. The whir of its wheels was for some the sound of tradition unraveling, and bicycle face was the imagined scar tissue. The deepest part of the night has long since passed, and there's a subtle shift in the air, a quiet anticipation of dawn, even though it's still far off. In our journey through the Victorian era, the strange panic over bicycle face is also heading towards its twilight. Like all moral panics, its fever eventually had to break, its absurdity becoming more apparent than its supposed threat. The demise of the bicycle face scare wasn't marked by a dramatic announcement or a sudden retraction from the medical community. Instead, it gradually faded from public discourse as the 1890s gave way to the early 20th century. A mainstream historical fact is that the sheer, overwhelming evidence of countless women cycling without any discernible long-term facial disfigurement ultimately rendered the warnings moot. Reality, it turned out, was a pretty effective cure for bicycle face. Women kept pedaling, their faces reflecting not permanent strain, but the exhilaration of movement, the simple joy of a sunny afternoon ride, or the focused determination of commuting to a job or running an errand. It became increasingly difficult to point to a cyclist and cry, "Bicycle face," when she was smiling, healthy, and clearly enjoying herself. The proof just wasn't materializing. Moreover, as bicycles became more common and integrated into daily life, the novelty and associated anxieties began to wane. What was once a revolutionary, potentially disruptive technology slowly became just another mode of transport, another leisure activity. The new woman continued her evolution, and while societal resistance to female emancipation certainly didn't disappear, the bicycle itself became less of a controversial symbol and more of a practical tool. It's like how early automobiles were seen as noisy, dangerous contraptions that frightened horses, but eventually they just became cars. Familiarity, it seems, breeds less contempt and more acceptance, or at least less public hysteria. The legacy of the bicycle face scare, however, is quite telling. It serves as a fascinating case study in how societal anxieties, particularly around gender roles and technological change, can manifest as seemingly medical concerns. It highlights the power of the media to amplify and sensationalize such panics, and the way expert opinion, even when based on flimsy evidence, can be used to try and enforce social norms. Historians often look back at bicycle face as a prime example of a moral panic where a particular group or activity becomes a scapegoat for broader societal fears. It's a reminder that when people are confronted with rapid change, they sometimes invent new and creative things to worry about. Maybe if they'd had the internet back then, they'd have been warning about selfie scowl or hashtag hand. An odd detail in the fading of the scare is how quickly it seemed to be forgotten by the mainstream. Within a decade or so, the idea of bicycle face would likely have seemed quaintly old-fashioned, even to those who had once earnestly discussed its dangers. Other worries, like the burgeoning motor car and its actual tangible dangers, not to mention the upcoming world wars, would soon eclipse the fear of a cyclist's strained expression. Yet for a brief period, it was a genuine cultural talking point, a peculiar obsession that reveals so much about the Victorian mindset. The bicycle, of course, did triumph as a tool for women's emancipation. It provided affordable, independent transportation, expanded women's social and economic opportunities, and contributed to dress reform. The freedom to travel, to explore, to simply move through the world under one's own power was transformative. Susan B. Anthony wasn't exaggerating by much when she credited the bicycle with doing so much for women's liberation. It gave them literal and metaphorical momentum, and they achieved this not by conforming to expectations of placid beauty, but by embracing the activity, challenging the norms, and implicitly proving that Bicycle Face was a phantom menace. They just kept riding, and the world eventually had to catch up. There's still a healthy debate among scholars about the exact balance of factors that led to the Bicycle Face scare. Was it primarily about controlling women's newfound freedom, a manifestation of medical misogyny? Or was it more about a general technophobia, with women simply being the most visible and vulnerable users of this new machine? Or perhaps a complex interplay of both, seasoned with a genuine, if misguided, concern for well-being in an era of rudimentary medical science? The truth, as is often the case, likely involves elements of all these perspectives. What's clear is that it tapped into a rich vein of cultural anxiety, making it a surprisingly potent, if ultimately short-lived phenomenon. Looking back from our vantage point, the Bicycle Face scare is undeniably humorous. The idea of a woman's face becoming permanently contorted from the sheer effort of riding a bicycle seems preposterous, but it's a humor tinged with the recognition of the very real social pressures and absurd medical theories women have often faced when daring to step outside prescribed roles. It's a good reminder to occasionally look at our own modern anxieties and wonder which ones will seem utterly bizarre to future generations. You mean they were worried about what from looking at their phones too much? The ghosts of Victorian doctors solemnly stroking their beards and diagnosing Bicycle Face might offer a knowing, if slightly strained, smile as the first faint whispers of dawn begin to stir far beyond your window. Our own journey through the curious case of Victorian Bicycle Face is also drawing to a gentle close. We've seen how this peculiar panic arose, who championed it, who debunked it, and how it ultimately faded into the annals of historical oddities. It was, in essence, a perfect storm of late 19th century anxieties, medical misunderstandings, and the timeless human tendency to get a bit flustered by change. What made Bicycle Face such a fascinating, if fleeting, phenomenon? Firstly, it was the perfect embodiment of resistance to female emancipation. A mainstream historical fact is that the late Victorian era saw significant strides in women's rights and freedoms, and the bicycle became both a practical tool and a potent symbol of this movement. By medicalizing a supposed ugly side effect of this newfound freedom, opponents could attempt to discourage women from embracing it, appealing to vanity and societal expectations of feminine beauty. It was a rather ingenious, if ultimately unsuccessful, attempt to put the brakes on progress. Want to be free? Fine, but you'll look like you've been wrestling a badger. Secondly, the scare preyed on the era's genuine anxieties about health and the pressures of modern life. With rapid industrialization, urbanization, and a constant barrage of new inventions, there was a pervasive sense that society was becoming too fast, too stimulating, and that human bodies, particularly female ones, weren't built to cope. Bicycle face fit neatly into this narrative of modern life causing physical and nervous degeneration. It wasn't just a bicycle, it was a symptom of a society perceived to be going off the rails, or in this case, off the well-trodden path. Thirdly, the science behind it was so delightfully vague and subjective. The symptoms, a strained look, flushed cheeks, focused eyes, could easily describe anyone engaged in physical activity or deep concentration. An odd detail is that there were no before and after photographs presented as evidence, no empirical studies, just concerned pronouncements and anecdotal observations. This lack of concrete proof, paradoxically, might have made it harder to definitively refute for a time, as it operated in the realm of opinion and social pressure rather than verifiable fact. It's hard to argue against a look or an expression when beauty standards themselves are so culturally constructed. The bicycle face scare also serves as a wonderful reminder of how far we've come in terms of understanding exercise physiology and women's health. The idea that moderate physical activity could be detrimental to women, or that it would inherently make them less feminine, seems laughably outdated now. Today, we celebrate female athletes and widely recognize the physical and mental benefits of exercise for everyone. It makes you wonder what future generations will find equally amusing about our current health fads and fears. They really thought sitting too much would do that, and they called it office back. Historians still find bicycle face a rich topic for discussion, debating its precise cultural weight and its significance in the broader narrative of women's history and the history of technology. Was it a minor blip, a silly fad quickly overcome, or did it represent a more significant undercurrent of resistance that had a chilling effect, however temporary, on women's adoption of the bicycle and their push for greater freedom? The consensus seems to lean towards it being a notable, illustrative example of societal pushback, but one that ultimately failed to halt the wheels of change. The bicycle was just too useful, too liberating, and too much fun. Ultimately, the story of Bicycle Face is a story with a happy ending, at least for the cyclists. Women kept riding. They formed clubs, they toured the countryside, they used bicycles for work and for pleasure. They implicitly, and sometimes explicitly, rejected the notion that their pursuit of freedom and health would mar their beauty or destroy their femininity. They chose the open road over the anxious parlor, and in doing so, they didn't just avoid the dreaded bicycle face. They helped to shape a new face for womanhood, one that was active, capable, and self-determined. The bicycle became, as one enthusiast of the era put it, a steed of steel that carried women towards a brighter, more mobile future. And so, as the imaginary gaslights of the Victorian era dim in your mind and the whirring of those early bicycle wheels fades into a gentle hum, we leave behind the curious panic of Bicycle Face. Let it settle as a quirky, interesting tale, a testament to the enduring human spirit's ability to embrace the new, even when some voices are shouting dire, if slightly ridiculous, warnings from the sidelines. Now, let the image of those determined cyclists, their faces perhaps a little flushed with exertion, but bright with the joy of movement, gently soften and dissolve. Allow the echoes of Victorian anxieties and the clatter of cobblestone streets to fade away, replaced by the quiet comfort of your own peaceful surroundings. The journey into the past is complete, and it's time for your mind to rest, to pedal slowly and effortlessly into the realm of dreams. Feel the steady rhythm of your breathing, like the smooth, even cadence of a bicycle on a perfectly flat path. There are no more debates to consider, no outdated medical theories to ponder, only the gentle, soothing sensation of relaxation spreading through your body. Let any lingering thoughts about bicycle face or any other worries of the day simply drift away like autumn leaves caught in a gentle breeze, carried far from your awareness. Your mind is clear, your body is comfortable, and a deep sense of calm envelops you. The only expression on your face now is one of serene repose as you prepare for a night of deep, restorative sleep. There is nothing left to do but rest. Good night.